Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the AIM Growth Partners podcast. Today I am joined by Vikram Murthy, the co-founder of AmyGB.ai. Today I'm looking forward to diving into the real world problems that Vikram is solving. But first, let me hand over to him for a brief introduction.
Thanks so much, David. I'm Vikram. I'm a co-founder at AmyGB.ai. We are an AI company, like the title, of course, suggests. What we did was about 7 years back, me and my co-founders ventured into the space of customer support automation. Because my co-founders come from a very deep background of running business process outsourcing. So they understand the space really well. And I, of course, came from an analytics background. It, again, transitioned into like an AI kind of a space because that's where the whole world goes, right? Once you're done with analytics, the next part is AI. So we kind of blended both our expertise together, and we started off our journey by solving email support, automating email support, and we worked with a bunch of leading Indian organizations in order to automate their English language email support because English not being like the primary language in India is mostly like a secondary language for a lot of people. But of course, a lot of communication that happens still happens. So it was a little easier for us to kind of start processing those emails back then. But we later on realized that there was a lot of manual intervention that was required there simply because a lot of these emails were coming in only for the escalation purpose, right? For example, first level support had failed. People really wanted answers, and a lot of times they would not appreciate response from a bot. Actually, it would throw the customers offline. So we of course realized that there is these set of challenges out there, and we kind of moved into a different space, which is into something called as intelligent document processing. Now, this is where you actually have a bunch of agents, human agents, I mean, who basically look at financial documents. For example, purchase orders, invoices, etc. They take in inputs from that particular thing, enter it into a system, and then they of course have different points of triangulation, right? Because when an invoice is issued, then it typically links to a purchase order. So you need to figure out if this purchase order has been completely fulfilled by an invoice, and then you need to figure out, okay, who has issued the purchase order, so on and so forth, just so that the whole cycle is complete. Our product would actually just look at all of these digitized copies because not everything comes in a very clean PDF format. Typically, a lot of these invoices are in the form of
So we would basically capture all these points of information, put it together in a system, and of course have escalations and whatnot, right? In terms of something going overboard, etc., etc. So there was always like this element of a human supervision always built into the system. In this journey, we also found out that a lot of our customers were focusing on the analytics that we provided to them, which is very, very focused in terms of, let's say, what kind of invoices were, fraudulently issued, right? Which, for example, the purchase order does not kind of provide the right justification for having a particular invoice being issued and whatnot. And in some cases, what would happen was that there could be duplicate invoices which are servicing the same purchase order, so on and so forth. So these kind of analytics actually started catching the eye of our customers, and we built a fairly decent analytics suite on top of our platform. But I think overall what we realized is that this need for analytics actually spreads across different verticals, which is very clear because anyone who's got any sort of data would like to have some insights from it. But again, coming from my background as being an analyst, I realized that just analyzing historical patterns is not enough, right? Because what's the point of having all this historical information if you cannot make a decent prediction about something, right? It could be, okay, what should I plan the skew, in terms of like my marketing spend, or like what should be basically my inventory strategy for this particular skew, and so on and so forth. So the point is like, can you use the historical data to kind of come to this conclusion? And if possible, can you do it at the most granular level? Because sometimes what happens is that a supply chain could be, stretching across different cities, different geographies, and it could take maybe 2 months because when I consulted with some firms on the west coast of the US which dealt with luxury hardware, right? Luxury hardware in the sense that sofa sets, dining tables, whatnot, and these would be imported from all over the world. And these would be really expensive as well, right? The $10,000 dining tables, very exquisite ones. So the point is, of course, all of these things have a very large lead time. So the question is like, uh, is your forecast of a campaign bringing in X number of sales, is it good enough for me to place an order 6 months before? Because it is going to take me 3 months to get that thing into my warehouse. And that's when it's ready to sell. So I think all of these things actually led us to the current point, because actually till now we were technologically constrained, to put it very mildly, right? Because the thing is like, when you talk about retail analytics today, it is very, very human driven, in the sense that there is always like an analyst and working with a team of coders trying to codify a certain set of rules into the system, writing a typical software module, right, which basically says, uh, if I have this kind of historical data, run these kind of models and try to do a best fit, give me the right answer so that I can feed it into a model, and then that model rolls down or up, right, based on what the granularity looks like, right? Because you could either be doing a bottom-up planning or a top-down plan, right? That depends that way. So the point is like, the limitation happens to be this coding system, which basically takes a lot of time, right? And also is not very flexible, because the point is, in typical software engineering, you have to plan a lot in advance, ensure that you cover all the edge cases, and also as something as simple as having widgets on a dashboard, right? That has to be KPI'd like nobody's business a few months before, so that, all the leaders have the best possible views, and then basically once they have to drill down, they again have to get back to a team of analysts to kind of talk to them and figure out, okay, how do I drill down into this? Can you refresh these views for me? Because this data is not enough. It's not good enough. So the point is like, where all are the places where an LM can fit in and solve certain problems, right? So to give you a simple example, if I have a dashboard which has 5 widgets on it, and each of these widgets basically show different perspectives of last month's sales. What if some number seems off? Because see, the good thing about decision makers is their key skill set is making good decisions, and they have a very nice feel for whether a data point that they're looking at makes sense or not. So they will immediately be able to call something like that out. So in today's world, what happens is there is a team of analysts or a senior analyst sitting inside that meeting room who basically talks to this person who's taking the decision and says, okay, fine, can you explain to me what happened here, right? And then this person, if she or he is really smart enough, they just manage to quickly write out some queries, figure out and show them the results, right? I feel that all of this thing now, there is the time has come where LLMs can actually take over a large part of this, right? For example, like, let's say if the person has a question regarding, okay, can you tell me how did I get to this data point? Then the LLM can actually analyze that query, pull out the right data points, and just show a simple visualization, right? It need not be something very complex, but that happens real time. And so that is the place where we are trying to get to, in the sense that this is an analytics co-pilot in some sense, because there is this analyst who is going to input all the raw inputs into the system, right? Because the raw inputs are crucial, because an LLM will never be able to understand the intricacies of a database table, because the column names are so obscure simply because they've been built over a period of multiple years, right? Let's not even call it decades, just multiple years. Multiple designers have put in that particular thing. So ACT_SPD could mean account spending, but you will need a human analyst to basically inform that to the LLM and say that create this particular rule using this particular formula. And once that is fed into the system, yes, the system basically understands. The next time around, you can talk about account spending, it will immediately go fetch ACT_SPD. So at that level, you definitely need the analyst to feed in all of these important key pieces of information. But how the LLMs are going to help is simply by generating code, right? Because you don't have to write code yourself. You don't have to create multiple views on a database. You don't have to write multiple macros. Everything gets done using natural language prompt. What you have to do, however, is to ensure that the raw data that's going in is perfect, because the model also highlights outliers. It highlights stuff which it doesn't think is right. You will have to ensure that those data points are either cleaned or taken care of because only you, as a human being or a human analyst, can do that. An LLM really can't take decisions on that. So bottom line is, this is where the human element of the analyst sits. Whereas on the, let's say, the C-suite level or the management level, which is looking at the dashboard, for them, the advantage becomes then real-time refresh of data. Right? They can access multiple views, they can access multiple drill downs, and they can possibly have limitless information. Now, of course, how accurate it is, again, depends on the entire circle, right? Because they give feedback, the analyst gives feedback, and the model has to kind of figure those things out.
So you've given a few different perspectives there and talked about kind of the different use cases with the particular kind of co-pilot you're developing, you and your co-founders and the team are developing. You've spoken about, the kind of the trends of moving from quite simple automations to now much more complex, using AI in the process. Drilling down on the specific perspectives that you kind of outlined there. So aside from, replacing maybe part of the team, as you mentioned, you're still going to need an analyst to make sense of some of those titles and make sense of some of the kind of the data sets that are being plugged in there. But what, at kind of a macro level, is the real kind of benefit? You mentioned before I let you answer, I know you were saying about like kind of the rigidity of a lot of the traditional approaches. They're not kind of flexible enough to adjust to kind of fluctuations or changes in the data. So what's the real world impact for businesses of different sizes of having a solution like this Copilot?
Right. I'd like to give an adjacent example, right? Like, let's talk about coding agents, because they are fairly popular by now, and a lot of companies have already implemented that practice, right? Again, I think the very oft-quoted soundbite I always get from any podcast or any conversation is that this has only made engineers more productive. Right. So the point is, end of the day, I don't think anyone has gotten to the stage where, they can let go of their, I wouldn't say like performant engineers, but, most of their engineering. Most of their engineering team is still sitting there. It's just that now the timelines are crunched because you have tools that improve your productivity, right? So, which means you ship stuff faster, you get faster feedback from the markets, and your product just becomes exponentially better fast. In short, that's what the story that is coming out from these coding agents, right? Which, of course, even we experience, because simply, all of us in my team, at least, we use Cursor and other tools, right? Like that, to have better output and also like much faster output. Now, if you take the same story into an analytics world, right? Typically, data analyst teams are smaller in size. They aren't even like a tenth as large as the development teams, because it is expected of an analyst to basically sit on the laptop and crunch numbers for 15 hours a day. And that's typically how their workday goes. And more often than not, a lot of time is spent in terms of data munging itself, right? Which means that figure out which systems to get the data from, and then see, how to clean all of these things together, how to co-tab all of them together, extract all sorts of insights and all. The point is, if you can actually automate this entire process where you can try this out once, right? You teach an agent how to do this once and save it as let's say a cron job or something like that, right? And then the cron job just immediately runs at a preset time on a daily basis. Now, whether you want it to run at a preset time or you want to manually trigger it, that's up to you, right? End of the day, all of these grunt tasks, right, take up a huge amount of productive time. Whereas I think a good analyst, her true value comes from giving decent insights, right? Like looking at the data and going, okay, something smells fishy. Let's dig deeper into this kind of stuff, which I would say is a little different from what a coder does, because a typical coder is given a set of requirements and the person has to write code, ensure that they unit test it, and then they pass it on, right? Whereas I think a job of an analyst is more akin to that of someone who's checking the code that a coder has written. So a team lead of sorts, right? Because that person has to use their insight to figure out what the edge cases could be from the module that someone has contributed to the recent check-in, and say, okay, this could break in certain cases, right? And that person is very, very critical. So imagine a whole team of such people. So that is basically a data analyst for you. So to me, I have a soft corner because I come from that line myself, but this is reality. You can speak to most people who work in this particular field and they'll tell you that typically a lot of the time goes in this, and then when it's crunch time, when the C-suite is demanding the latest month's reports or latest week's reports. Everyone's working 18-hour days. And basically, I think a lot of this load can be taken off. And what can be done is this kind of information processing can be very, very smooth, right? Where you have actual real-time access to information. And to be honest, I think good decision making is all about having good data. If you don't have good data at the right point of time, your decisions are going to be really bad. So to us, the pitch is more like we make all of your data accessible to you in real time as possible, physically possible. That is the pitch.
Right. So it's not so much about, replacing humans and reducing the workforce. The real benefit comes from improving productivity, shifting people from the grunt work, as you called it, shifting them into kind of higher, more strategic, higher leverage activities, being able to ship quicker, receive market feedback quicker, make iterations, so basically ship faster, innovate quicker, and essentially it's all those kind of productivity efficiency gains. You mentioned data is really important, shifting focus from the grunt work of data input to actually the strategic, looking at the data, does this make sense, and challenging it. If people are working 18-hour days manually coding, manually inputting data, I guess the fatigue element means that there's probably a lot more from a strategic level that's overlooked. So we're not replacing people, we're just shifting focus into more strategic value add layers, allowing the business to ship quicker, innovate quicker, and make better, more informed decisions.
Absolutely. You nailed it. Yeah.
Amazing. And so for you and the business are based out of India. We've mentioned off air that, the US and other kind of markets are going to be strategic areas and kind of markets for you to launch into. So talk to me through, why the US, what's the vision there, and what's going to be some of the kind of the challenges or the complexities around launching over there.
Right. So I think for any enterprise software business that's based out of India, right, the strategy has always been having boots on the ground in the US, right? There's no other way around it because let's be honest, that's like the biggest market in the world. There is no going away from that fact. So the point is like when you are trying to sit in India and trying to sell a product, some companies have been very, very successful at it. So for example, there is an Indian company called Zoho, which does productivity suites in terms of like emails and ticketing platforms, etc., etc. And they have grown very organically in terms of just digital ad campaigns, right? So it's been a long journey for them. I mean, maybe 30 years or so, but they've done a really good job of doing it sitting out here in India. And of course, then when they got into enterprises and stuff, they had to have people on the ground out there. But the point is like, if you are trying to impact the kind of people that we are talking about, right? So the point is you need a key sponsor and you need key decision makers to be on board when you have software of this caliber, because obviously this is not a simple email or a ticketing platform. This is something which deals with your sensitive information, and this is something which is probably going to reside on your infrastructure, because one of our key USP also is that we do not have any cloud-based applications. So everything is basically, although these foundational models are open source, we fine-tune them a lot based on the data that we generate ourselves and whatnot, just to ensure that no data goes out of the premise, right? So if this is going to be our pitch, then we need to be having regular conversations with CIOs, CTOs of different companies, because for one, they will introduce us to the chief analytics officer if they have one, or they take decisions on such key aspects, right? So the point is we have to get there, right? There is no going away from that fact. But the crucial problem here seems to be that today everyone's pitching an LLM-based application, right? Now the question is like, how many of them work? God only knows, right? Because and maybe even God doesn't know, to be honest, because it's just insane, the whole field. So what we are planning is a much smaller strategy, in the sense that why don't you prove yourself with businesses at home, right? Pick up use cases where you have lots of data and you have people that have a burning need to use that information, because they either lack the resources to hire someone who can do this for them and whatnot. Prove it there, right? Prove it in these small cases. And once you have it proven across, let's say, 3 different verticals. 3 is just a magic number, but it's just number that I'm just quoting. So you prove it across these verticals and you prove that it can be done with minimal manual intervention. then we directly go start talking to investors in the US and whatnot, trying to pitch the solution, because eventual goal is to move there.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. One of the things we discussed off air was the importance of fine tuning these LLMs. Some of these bigger companies, we hear on a daily basis about these kind of new product launches and new businesses that are getting in, kind of innovating in this space. Talk to us around, the importance of fine tuning these LLMs and really kind of ensuring that you're getting out what you expect and getting the most value out of them.
Sure. So I think when we began our experiments, we actually just took these pre-trained models which are posted in Hugging Face, right? Because they are like a good benchmark, so to speak, in order to determine if like it is able to do the task that you ask it to, right? So for example, we started with the Llama series model, which have been released by Meta. And we realized that although these models are very capable, there is definitely a lack of consistency in the responses, right? Now, there are technical parameters that you can use, but again, that control is very limited, because all you can do is set a couple of knobs and then just sit down and pray that the answer is consistent every single time. Vis-a-vis, when you actually fine-tune the model on your existing data set, you're almost like making it rote learn, right? You're telling it that, you know what, this is my universe. You should stick to this part of my universe and not think about answering why the sky is blue, because that is not what anyone's going to ask you. What they're going to ask you is, okay, I need to basically aggregate these 3 sheets on my Excel sheet. Can you help me do that, right? That is what you need to be focusing on. So I think the more data you give it on a local problem, the better it gets at solving that local problem, right? Now, having said that, like, is fine-tuning always the best option? Not necessarily, right? Because sometimes what happens is you would want it to take a call on something let's say I have some data and I need to suggest or recommend a visualization for that data, right? Because obviously I'm not the best person to do that, but the LLM, having all that knowledge and information with it, can tell me, looking at the granularity of the data, as to what chart type I should be using, what are the color palettes that go with it and whatnot, right? So again, that becomes another agent out here. So that is how we get into this business of multi-agent programming in some sense, right? Because one agent deals with a very, very specific fine-tuned task, whereas the other one could still be a pre-trained model, but it deals with a much more, let's say, a meta task of trying to understand the data and also telling you that, yes, you can use a bar chart with 3 stacks or whatever. So I think that's how a lot of these agentic frameworks are actually coming through, because apparently by next year you will have agents that can actually book hotel tickets for you and whatnot with just a phone call or a chat. Well, that's what people in OpenAI have been promising for about a year or so, but I guess that will become a reality soon. So what this means is that you have smaller and smaller LLMs. So it goes into the territory of small language models, which I think is just another cool euphemism for a fine-tuned large language model, right? So the point is, like, these guys specialize in doing a certain task, and you better not ask it any other question, because you're not going to get the right answer, right? So that's how it's progressing.
Interesting, and I guess that brings me on to the next question. You kind of touched on it there, and well, I'm inferring from it, hallucinations is something kind of hear and read about quite a lot. And as we talk about how much job disruption there's going to be in introducing AI into the workforce, you've always got those people there who are raising alarm bells about AI won't tell you when it doesn't know the answer. It will come up with an answer that could be completely wrong. So that's the risk of surrendering control entirely. The decision making, you said data is so important, and your solution is helping create good data so that decisions can be made. How do hallucinations fit into there, and what's the benefit? If I'm understanding correctly, there's some benefits of having smaller language models who are trained and specialized. How does that help overcome this hallucinations problem?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because like, we struggled with this problem for a good month or two, trying to figure out, like, how do you solve this? Because, like, that's the very first question I would ask myself. If I was an analyst and I was looking at the output of something, I obviously wouldn't take it at face value. I would definitely drill down, try put some pivots and figure out if things seem okay. So I think for us solving hallucination, actually we're taking two separate approaches for it, and it's very custom to our area of work. Other companies are doing other things, right? So for us, the main thing is the code that the agent generates. That has to be validated, right? Just because the code compiles doesn't mean it's going to do the right thing. So how do you ensure that it's going to do the right thing? So typically what we have done is we've taken very small pre-trained models, so to speak of, right? Like I can go a little technical. So the number of parameters in a model determine like how big and small they are. So the ones that are answering your queries on ChatGPT are 400, 500 billion parameter models, which require at least 4x that kind of memory on a GPU, right? Because typically like one parameter is equal to like 4 bytes of memory. Very rough calculation. So we take something which is much smaller, like a 1.5 or 2 billion parameter model, and we have three of those which actually generate the code for the same task. So what that does is it's like a voting mechanism, right? Because like all three of them compile and all three of them are generating a certain output. So the question is how many of them agree with each other. So if 2 out of 3 agree with the result that's being generated, then the response we send out is basically a high confidence response, because we know that two of them are okay and the third guy is probably hallucinating, right? Whereas if only one of them is giving the right answer but it's not agreeing with anything else, we just send out a low confidence score saying that you need to check your data now because I'm not really sure. So that's how we come up with this I don't know thing, which typical GPTs have a problem with, right? Any large language model has a problem with. And the second thing that we do is because this is such an Excel specific thing, it's easier for us to actually prove that our answer is correct. So for example, if you wanted to find the sum of a particular column in your data, right? So you'll say, okay, give me the aggregation of this particular column. Question is, how do you validate if that aggregation is correct or not? So what we typically do is we actually have another view which we open where we have like a cell with a formula inside it which has sum is equal to something, right? So that way we're making the life of the validator also very easy because they don't have to go through multiple monkey hoops to kind of validate if the answer is right. So that's how we are building scaffolding around these platforms so that we know for a fact that what we're putting out is mostly true. But again, having said that, this is how the tech is, right? So there can be mistakes even after this.
So that's brilliant. Instead of relying on just, I think, or rephrasing that, thinking out loud. I guess with AI, the risk is people do become incredibly lazy and surrender too much control because it can automate a lot of these tasks. Why would I go through and replicate it just see if I come up with the same answer? It can do it in a fraction of a second. It's going to take me hours. Why bother? So you talked about that kind of scaffolding piece, that it's like, hey, look, we have low confidence or high confidence in these answers. These are some steps you can take to sort of verify that. And as you were saying in that separate pane, using that kind of column example of here's how you can test it and do it quicker, pre-written the equation you need for example, the sum of. So it makes it a lot easier for them to validate, and you're kind of encouraging people, not, oh, look at our fancy shiny object, our tool that can cut all this time down, and just hiding the fact that it can get things wrong. You're being very open and transparent. This is our confidence in this answer. Here's how you can validate it. And we've done a lot of the grunt work or a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of like giving you the equation and giving you the kind of the methods of validating. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Amazing. It's so interesting, or it's been so interesting unpacking the kind of evolution you've been on as a business, as I said, moving from quite simple automations now into implementing AI. We've spoken about how we're sort of balancing that human and AI interaction there. You spoke about analysts and a lot of the engineering teams. They're not going to be made redundant. They still play an important role, but more in the strategic level. What are your kind of predictions looking ahead at this rapidly evolving technology in this technology landscape, looking at AI particularly? What are your predictions sort of going forward for the market where AI can really help sort of revolutionize? What's getting you kind of most excited?
Yeah, to me, I think I'm in the school of thought where I believe that people with the right amount of creativity can do a lot better with their time in some sense, because in a lot of cases, to just quote a adjacent example, right? Like I know of a person who used to work for a big MNC, and this person really wanted to build a particular tool, right? But they ran into all sorts of headwinds, and it never went through. This person steps out for a year, secures funding, builds a product, which exactly was what he was planning to build inside the company. And then he sold it back to the company for 10 million USD. 1 year, right? So the point is that everyone knows that there is a need for something, but every organization struggles with priority lists and buckets. So the point is like, if every organization could actually knock out their top 10 challenges within the amount of budget allocated to them, within the amount of time allocated to them, I'm sure there will be a lot more, let's say, productive use of an organization's time itself. Now, of course, will this lead to a whole new set of industries? Definitely, right? Because to me, AI is just now the next operating system, which of course everyone keeps speaking of. But to me, this operating system is also driven by human creativity. It's not just, a tool that can record and be a personal assistant and personal friend or whatever. But it can also help you kind of create some new stuff which probably you have the back of your mind but don't have time to execute. So I'm just like completely gung-ho about the space and just super excited to see what happens in the next 5 years. But one thing I'm sure of is there is no AGI happening in the next 5 years, because I think that's a pipe dream that everyone's been chasing around, and like people don't even have the definition for the word AGI, because like, what is general intelligence? I don't know. So the point is like, sure, you're securing the next round of $1 billion in funding. That's a great thing to talk about,
Yeah.
please. But otherwise, if you can just give me a definition of what this AGI is going to do for me, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
Because I have a 3-year-old son at home. If the AGI can take care of him right away, I'm willing to just give him away to the AGI. Right? But seems a little far off.
Wow. I think it's interesting. I had someone on the podcast yesterday, yet to be released, and they kind of brought up this topic or this phrase. I don't think they kind of coined it, but employeepreneurship. And in their business, they weren't talking about it specifically within the AI context, but what you were mentioning there about that person that left the business and then created a business, a product they were going to do anyway, and sold it back to the business. How important do you think it is of fostering a culture of this, if we want to call it employeepreneurship? Because you're going to have your ideas, you're going to have your preset sort of ideas and use cases for AI, but you'll probably have people in your teams in different departments, like your co-founders come from different backgrounds and look at things in a different way, which obviously has been essential for getting your business to where it is now. So how important do you think is it, like, creating that environment where you can say to people, yeah, you go out and test these things, you build the solutions, it's going to bring the business forward, rather than having to kind of step outside and leave you and you buy their solution. How important is that, building that kind of culture?
Yeah, I think it's extremely interesting to put it that way, because see, as a startup, you typically struggle with time bandwidth issues, right? Because you don't want to kill your employees by making them work in the 996 culture, because that's not sustainable, to be honest. And the point is like, at what level do you tell them that you can take some time off from what you have to deliver to me, which is very critical, because I am a startup and I need to like constantly keep innovating, right? So the point is like, and that innovation sometimes has to be top down, simply because the people in the team maybe lack the relevant experience, right? Because maybe they lack the relevant vision. So you will have to drive it in some level. But then, having said that, if you have this culture of pushback in your team, I think that is actually critical. I think that's where it begins, this journey of employeepreneurship, because once they understand that they can ask relevant questions and they can prove someone at a C-level wrong, right?
Yeah.
And the person at the C-level has the humility to accept it, is when they will start thinking around, okay, what are the other things I can fix that's around me, right? And that's when I can start asking questions about, okay, I don't like the way this is done, so what can we do about it? So I think we can make a small start there, because as a startup, I'm really honest about the fact that I want the best from my team during the weekdays, but weekends I don't want to touch them because they have their own personal lives. And if they so please, they can definitely take it up on the weekends, right? I mean, who's stopping them?
Yeah.
But during the weekdays, it's got to be about the company and the vision and whatnot. And because I think Google did have this 20% a week rule, right? Where 20% of your time you could take off and do something. I don't know if it still exists, to be honest, because now the organization is hundreds of thousands of people strong. So is it easy enough to monitor those kind of things? How do you define productivity metrics around it? There has to be a goal plan. And someone has to always mentor these people, right? Because you can go really wild. Like you want to make like a popcorn maker which gives you popcorn in like 2 seconds instead of five. That doesn't serve anybody's purpose, right?
Yeah.
At least not the organization's bigger goal. So the point is like, yeah, you need to have those kind of sponsors in the organization also, which means you need to have the bandwidth. So I think it all ties down to that. I think this is best suited for companies which are at a mature stage where they do have all of this and they're facing growth challenges, right? I think this is perfect for them. For a startup, growth is not a problem.
Yeah.
Because you're always growing from a smaller base. You are always dreaming up new products because that's what you want to do as a startup.
Yeah, that's interesting. And looking back over your career now as a co-founder, as a founder of a business, as an innovator, we've spoken about the kind of the evolution of the business, your solutions, and now building the product. Looking back over the career, obviously there's been undoubtedly like a load of challenges, a load of lessons learned. From those lessons learned, what's been the kind of greatest lessons you've learned? What's the greatest kind of advice you can impart on, new founders, innovators in the space who are looking to, I don't know, maybe set up on their own or are struggling with challenges of their own inevitably earlier on in their journey?
Yeah. So there is this very common saying which says that first time entrepreneurs think of tech and second time entrepreneurs think about distribution, because they've understood that unless you can get your cool tech in the hands of someone who really wants to use it, it's pretty useless.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fossil basically. So the point is like, my personal lesson is like, just be really good at sales. Just be really good at going there and pitching the heck out of something which is very, very ordinary as well, right? But just make it sound good. Try your best to sell. Because the point is like, unless you can learn the art of figuring out how you're going to distribute your product, your startup is never going to really take off.
Yeah.
So to me, that's like the number one lesson, right? Because I still rely on my co-founders to basically make the contacts and have the sales channel, because they take care of the sales and stuff, because I need to focus on a lot more critical stuff. But this is not my first entrepreneurial journey, right? Because I started it a lot earlier than I met my current co-founders as well. And back then I was like a one-person shop, because I was still picking up some parts of a business and trying to build it into something coherent. So over there, of course, I did appreciate the fact that I had to go and talk to people. I had to go and pitch my stuff. And I thoroughly enjoyed that process. I think it made me a better person, a person as well, but a good co-founder as well, because a lot of times technical co-founders do not understand the challenges. They can never put themselves in the shoes of a co-founder who's trying to generate some leads and trying to sell something. It's super hard.
Yeah.
Trying to get somebody's time after 3 missed calls, and you've been chasing this person for 3 months, and now you get to meet this person for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
How do you handle that? That is just, I think, gut wrenching. So the point is like, I would recommend everyone get into sales first. Right? To me, that's the biggest lesson. And I think the second lesson is always like, when you're looking for co-founders, right? I mean, again, there's no rocket science here. You need to have, as little overlapping skill as possible. I think the Venn diagram should basically be 2 separate circles. Apart from the fact that you both are aligned, or all 3 people or 4 people are aligned in the same direction, I think the lesser things you have in common, the better it is, because I think diversity is just underrated.
Yeah.
It's criminally underrated. So have people from diverse backgrounds and just learn to hear them out. Listening skills very important.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think it's so interesting from a psychology perspective. You look up, I don't know if you've ever read the book Surrounded by Idiots, but it's quite interesting about that dynamic. And having worked in sales and recruitment roles myself, it's very much a lot of businesses, I think, fall into the trap of just hire carbon copies of themselves. They end up with a load of like red and yellow personalities, and they don't have the kind of the green and blue, the more kind of analytical, the more creative, the different things. And I think the problem is then naturally you've got a lot of egos, you've got a lot of people trying to do things and outcompete, and that's what leads to very kind of competitive sales floors, which seems a good thing. But I think having that balance is so important. I work with a bunch of founders as well who are commonly pushing the blame onto the sales team of the leads aren't good, this isn't good, that's not good. Once I get on a demo, I close 80% of people, and you think, well, actually, from the people that are transitioning onto a demo, so many of them have probably dropped off. If your messaging isn't good and you can't actually articulate the problem and you can't communicate in a language that resonates with their actual challenges, right, there's no surprise that not many people are coming to the demo. If they've managed to get all the way to a point where they've got a demo, they're on your level in terms of technical kind of capabilities. So working with those bands is a case of like, actually, how can we talk around the problem so much that it gets everyone excited? You're not just speaking to the CFO, the CIO, the CTO, the CEO, whoever it is. You're speaking to everyone and understanding and appreciating all of their problems. You're not selling your product on all of the technical capabilities and how it's better than all the competitors out there. It's what business problem is this going to solve? How much money is it going to save? How much efficiency is it going to drive? How many clients is it going to help you win? What are the competitive standouts? And I think it's such an interesting thing. So many fantastic founders I've worked with that have built incredible products, but it's almost that sort of Noah's Ark mentality of build it and they'll come. So then only realize actually no one is coming without that sales and marketing push. No one's buying.
The only thing that comes is a flood and deluge that takes you away. That's it. Nothing else. Yeah. So.
Well, look, I think that's amazing advice from you. You know, build a diverse team, understand your own sort of blind spots and kind of build around that. You know, partner with founders and build or co-founders, build a team that complement and don't overlap too closely the skills that you've got. You don't want a load of mini me's within the company because you're going to have the same sort of blind spots.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, look, I think it's been incredibly interesting from my perspective, learning about the evolution of the business, the evolution of the tech, how you've gone from very simple solutions to, you know, implementing AI and all of the benefits that you're sort of driving with the organizations you're working for. Keen to kind of keep track of your journey as you're kind of launching this product, starting with, you know, clients in India close to home or closer to home, as you mentioned, and then expanding over into the US as well. In terms of any sort of final thoughts from you, Vikram, was there anything you wanted to kind of leave the listeners with? Any way that you want to kind of signpost how they can kind of reach out to you if they're interested in finding out more about you and the business?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm very inactive on social media. So, I mean, good luck finding me there. But I'm on LinkedIn. So just hit me up in case you feel like you can have an interesting conversation. I'd love to hear people's thoughts about this thing because I think the more I've spoken with people like you and people who you know are also from the space or are from a very different space altogether, I think as you grow older you appreciate ideas a lot more.
Yeah.
Because like when you're just shooting SHIT, when you're like having a beer with friends when you're 20s, it really doesn't matter as much, right? Because it's just something goes and comes out. But I would love to hear thoughts from different perspectives, different industries, because I'm sure all of them have their own unique perspectives on where this technology can take them. Again, right? Like, again, I'm going to be very focused on AI itself, but then I'd love to hear what your perspectives are on different topics and whatnot. So, yeah, that'd be great.
Absolutely, and no doubt, you know, one thing we didn't kind of drill down on, but was specifically that supply chain thing. I think most people have seen about all the supply chain attacks. So from a security perspective, I think there's probably a lot of businesses out there that do want more visibility into their supply chains, whether it's from a security standpoint or just an optimization standpoint. I think there's a lot of people that's going to resonate with. Yeah, hopefully listeners do manage to find you on LinkedIn and sort of reach out. Once again, I just wanted to thank you for your time, for your contribution, for all of the kind of knowledge and wisdom you've imparted on me and the listeners. Yeah, wish you all the best and best success with the business.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.